This is a diagram of different types of research. If you're randomly assigning your participants to different conditions, meaning to different situations, it's an experiment. In an experiment, the researcher selects the conditions that he or she wants to compare, and then the researcher randomly assigns the participants to those conditions, and then the researcher collects data to look at the effect of the conditions. In an experiment on memory, I might randomly assign some participants to 60 degrees and some people to 80 degrees, and then compare the effect of those two temperatures on memory. That's an experiment. In an experiment, you select the conditions that you want to compare, you randomly assign the participants to those conditions, and then you look at the effect of those conditions. If there's no random assignment, it's not an experiment. And now let's look at different types of non-experimental research. If you're just observing people in public, it's a field study. Like if you're observing people at a college campus or at a shopping center, it's a field study. We talked about two types of field studies, naturalistic observation and participant observation. If I'm giving my participants questionnaires or tasks to complete, it's actually a different type of study other than a field study. So if I'm giving my participants personality questionnaires, like personality tests, or if I'm giving them tasks to complete, like an IQ test or a memory test, it's not a field study because I'm not doing my study in the field anymore. I'm not doing my study in public or real world settings. So there's different types of this type of questionnaire or task research. If there's no selection of conditions, it's a correlational study. And I'll tell you what I mean by no selection of conditions. What if I wanted to do a correlational study to look at the correlation between the hours that people work per week and the hours of sleep that people get per night? In a correlational study, I would just record these two columns of data. So I would ask each person, how many hours do you work per week and how many hours of sleep are you getting per night? And I would get two numbers from each person. These are the two numbers from person one. These are the two numbers from person two, and so on. Each row is a different person. And let's take a look at the different groups of people that I'm comparing. I'm comparing these different groups of people here. I have one group of two people who are working 20 hours per week. This person is a group of one person who's working 21 hours per week. This is a group of three people that are working 22 hours per week. Here's another group of one person who's working 27 hours per week. Here's another group. Here's a group, and here's a group. So after I've collected my data right here, I'm actually comparing the hours of sleep across all 7 of these groups of people. I'm comparing the hours of sleep of the group that works 20 hours, the group that works 21, the group that works 22, the group that works 27, the group that works 32, the group that works 33, and the group that works 40. Those are the 7 groups of participants that I'm comparing on hours of sleep in this type of study. But in this correlational study here, I didn't select my conditions. In other words, I didn't decide to compare these 7 specific hours of work. I didn't know that I was going to get 2 participants who work 20 hours per week. I didn't know I was going to get a person who works 20 hours per week. I didn't know ahead of time that any of these numbers would actually appear in my data. I mean, I just gave out my survey, and I just recorded whatever numbers ended up appearing in here, and then those became the groups of people that I ended up comparing. I didn't actually select these 7 specific numbers ahead of time to be the hours of work that I would compare. That's why it's a correlational study, no selection of conditions. These are my 7 conditions, but I didn't decide ahead of time that these would be the 7 conditions to compare. Now, what if I did select my conditions? What if I decided ahead of time that I wanted to compare people who work 20 hours per week and people who work 40 hours per week? And in my advertisement for the study, I actually said that I need people who either work 20 hours per week or 40 hours per week. I said that I need those 2 types of people in my study. And then I ended up getting 2 groups of participants. One group told me that they worked 20 hours per week. So these are all the people who told me that they worked 20 hours per week. The other group of participants all tell me that they work 40 hours per week. But I knew ahead of time that half of my participants would be working 20 hours per week, and the other half would be working 40 hours per week, because I actually sought out these 2 groups of participants. So I actually did select my conditions. I decided that my 2 conditions would be 20 hours of work and 40 hours of work. So I'm actually selecting my conditions just like I would in an experiment. Just like how in an experiment I would select specific temperatures to compare, like 60, 70, and 80 degrees. And then I would record each person's hours of sleep. And like this might be 7, this might be 6, this might be 7, this might be 8. So I would end up getting the answers for all 5 people who work 20 hours per week, and I would get 5 answers from all 5 people who work 40 hours per week, and I would compare the sleep hours of this group with the sleep hours of this group. I would to see which group of people is getting more hours of sleep per night. But here we did have selection of conditions. So it's actually a quasi-experiment. It's more like an experiment than a correlational study is, because in a correlational study, you don't actually select specific conditions to compare. You just record X and you record Y, and just your data ends up being whatever it is. In a quasi-experiment, you do select specific conditions to compare. So if this is X and this is Y, then in a quasi-experiment, the researcher selects specific levels of X to include in the study. And for example, in this case, I selected 20 and 40 to be my 2 levels of X. That's why it's a quasi-experiment. So quasi-experiment still isn't a real experiment because there's no random assignment, but it's more like an experiment than a correlational study is, because I am selecting the conditions that I want to compare. Now, if you're deciding that you want to compare specific ages, like if I decide that I want to compare 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 60-year-olds, I'm doing a developmental study. And a developmental study can be longitudinal, cross-sectional, or cross-sequential, depending on how it's run. That's one type of quasi-experiment. If I'm doing a different type of quasi-experiment, in which I'm not comparing ages, but I'm just comparing groups of people who experience different situations, it's one of these other types of quasi-experiments. If the situations were experienced before the study, it's ex post facto. So if I'm comparing a group of participants who went to preschool and a group who didn't go to preschool, it's ex post facto because they experienced either preschool or no preschool before entering my study. They didn't go through those situations during my study. This would actually be ex post facto because this group was already working 20 hours per week before entering the study. This group was already working 40 hours per week before entering the study. So they actually experienced one situation or the other before coming into the study. And I'm just trying to look at all I'm doing is doing a survey to try to look at the effect of these two situations. So this would be ex post facto, actually. A non-equivalent groups design is when you actually, when actually the participants go through the situations during your study, and you as a researcher actually manipulate those situations. But still, way back up here, there's no random assignment. So we're still talking about a study that's not a true experiment. An experiment has to have random assignment. So if I what if I take if I have one section of my class who that I teach one way, and another section of my class that I teach a different way, I'm putting those two groups of people through different situations during my study, and I'm actually manipulating something. I'm manipulating my teaching method. But the thing is, I didn't assign the participants to one section of my class or the other. They decided on their own which class to enroll in. So those two groups were already formed. That type of study would be called the non-equivalent groups design. Because in that type of study, would be the non-equivalent groups design because those two sections of my class are actually going through those situations during my study. and I'm manipulating those situations, but it's not being done with random assignment. I have section 1 of my class and section 2 of my class. Those two sections were already two groups that already existed before my study, and I just decided to put one group through one situation and the other group through the other situation. So it's a non-equivalent groups design, which is